Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad with Capitalism Hits Home. Today I want to talk about mass murder, which is recently very much in the news. And we are indeed the leaders of the world in mass murder. No one even comes close. We're also the leader in a particular kind of mass murder, which we have seen recently in quite a dramatic fashion, where 19 children in second grade, third grade, and fourth grade were shot dead, and 2 teachers were shot dead at the same time. That happened in Uvalde, Texas, a state whose Governor Abbott, is a grand champion of free guns and guns that should be able to be concealed and carried everywhere. As a little ironic aside, everywhere doesn't include the NRA convention, which is happening, or actually happened, in Houston, Texas, where they did not allow any guns, concealed or otherwise. Big exception to the NRA's program. At any rate, I want to talk about mass murder, and I want to talk about school shootings, because there have been 27 school shootings so far this year, and the year isn't even half over. There have been 217 mass killings, but only 27 school shootings, and this, I have to emphasize, we have more than a half a year to go. Besides those school shootings, we should note that shooting deaths are now the leading cause of deaths of children. And most of those are homicide deaths rather than suicide deaths. So that we are in a unique position here. No other nation comes anywhere close to the United States. And we have to figure out what's going on here. What is the extent of the problem? What are the reasons for the problem? What are the reasons psychologically and emotionally? What are the reasons politically and economically? And also, we have to figure out, what can we do about this? Because something should be done, and it isn't done. In Sandy Hook, about 10 years ago, actually, 20 more children were killed and 6 teachers in Sandy Hook. And since then, we've done nothing to control guns or change gun culture. In fact, since the pandemic, gun purchases have gone up 65%. So people are not learning that their problems are not solved by guns, even though obviously having a gun doesn't kill the pandemic. Now, one of the things that is an economic, but also an emotional and psychological cause of this damage is that children are totally abandoned to their families. We don't take social responsibility for children. Most of the mass killings are committed by people 16 to 24 years old, and they're all males. Why? We'll also look at, what about the male gender and the male role in society? It means that all of the mass murderers are male. Well, we can look at the family first. We can see that children are abandoned to their families. And of course, just because somebody's pregnant doesn't mean they could take care of anybody. No less a totally vulnerable little being that has needs for about 24 hours a day and can't really communicate or be told, hang on a second, I'm busy. No. Infants' needs are immediate, and they can't understand or negotiate them. We also have no childcare. that is a public assured quality daycare. 42% of our mothers are single mothers, often having to work and also bring up a totally vulnerable child. Since we don't have quality universal daycare, and daycare is approximately, for a minimally decent daycare, approximately $10,000 a year, you have children being either shuttled off to totally inadequate child care centers where they're huddled together in wet diapers watching television sets and crying. And this is in their years of their most important brain development, 0 to 2, and their second most important years for brain development, 2 to 6, until they can go to school. So that you have children totally imperiled and abandoned, and you have mothers pressed and stressed. And the more stressed a parent is, the more likely the child will be abused or neglected by an overwhelmed parent. In addition, the schools have failed our children. They don't notice the danger signs. And when they do, they can't fix them. In another recent school shooting, Ethan Crumbley made several doodles which his teachers noticed. Doodles of bullets, doodles of people shot in pools of blood with the words, "Help me." And when the school counselor brought in Ethan Crumbley's parents and told them they had to take him out of school at once, they refused, and that they had to get him mental health care within 48 hours. They just didn't do it. And he went to his knapsack, which was in his locker, took out his semi-automatic, and killed multiple children. His parents had gotten him his semi-automatic and then gave it to him early because he wanted it early. And then when the school expressed concern, Ethan Crumbley's mother wrote him a little text at school that said, "Hi, Ethan, don't do anything silly. LOL, Mom." And when Ethan Crumbley killed many of his fellow students, his parents hid out because they felt kind of responsible. Luckily, they weren't the smartest, and so they parked their own car in front of their hideout, which was a basement room in a warehouse in an industrial section. And so that they were caught. But they're typical. People buy their children guns. In the latest school shooting, which was by a young man whose last name was Ramos, an 18-year-old, who was allowed to go to the store and buy 2 semi-automatics, a handgun, bulletproof clothing, and 3,600 rounds of ammunition. And the storekeeper, being very happy to get the money, didn't feel he had to mention this to anyone. And Ramos didn't feel he had to qualify or take any tests to be given 2 semi-automatics. He too was a terribly neglected child. There's a saying, hurt people can hurt people. Deprived people can deprive people. He was a hurt person. His mother is a drug addict. When he tried to live there, she kicked him out, she and her boyfriend, after violent fights. And he went to live with his grandmother. He had a pronounced and terrible stutter. Stuttering only happens in children who have extreme emotional distress. The school neither picked picked that up and helped him, nor did it help him get any kind of speech therapy. So it didn't get him the psychological therapy he needed or the speech therapy. One of his friends reported that he showed up with cuts all over his face in high school. And when asked what happened, he said, "I cut myself for fun." That's a sign of extreme distress. Surely his teachers recognized that his face was terribly lacerated, but they did nothing to help him, just like they did nothing to help him when he had a stutter. Ramos was terribly bullied over his stutter. The school also didn't intervene in the bullying, something that must have been called to their attention. In fact, every school shooter, from the Columbine shooters on, has been badly bullied in school and has suffered. And that suffering has not been interrupted by the school taking charge and stopping that young man from being tormented. This is a problem. It's a problem with our schools. It's a problem with our parents. It's a problem for children being abandoned to the cruelties of other children at school and the cruelties of their parents at home. Ramos had to live with his grandmother, with whom he didn't get along. He also posted his intentions 3 times, and Facebook somehow didn't pick that up. That he said, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother," on a post. Then, I shot my grandmother in the face, which was true. And now I'm going on to an elementary school to shoot the school up. You think that might have been picked up. In addition, all of these school shooters were boys, were males, usually between 16 and 24, usually on the younger side. Why are they all boys? Girls can be tormented too. Girls can be bullied too. Girls can be abused and neglected in their families too, because families really aren't able to take care of children often. And it's not only single parents. You can't abandon a totally vulnerable little person to 2 individuals who have no qualifications that aren't biological. But these are all boys. Why is it boys? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that boys have a very limited set of emotional permissions in the United States. Boys are not allowed to admit that they're lonely. They're not allowed to admit that they want to be held outside of a sexual context. They're not allowed to admit that they're very sad. Girls are allowed all those permissions. They're also not allowed affectionate touch. Girls can hug one another when they see each other. They can put their arms around each other. Boys are not allowed those pleasures, which are crucial for human beings. Touch is a crucial need of human beings. And boys are allowed to punch each other in the arm or do sports where they throw themselves on top of each other. And if they make a basket in basketball, they can pat each other's behind. But that's very limited and often violent. And so these boys are deprived of touch, as most boys are. All higher primates touch each other. They groom each other. Part of the bonding in their group is that they run their hands through each other's hair. They pick the fleas off of each other. And that's a way that they socially bond. Human beings need to be touched too. And, we don't groom one another and run our hands through each other's body hair because humans have lost most of the hair except on our heads. But we touch each other. And that touch is crucial to our survival. It releases endorphins, flood the body with a feeling of well-being. And boys are denied that. It's thought unmanly. They're supposed to man up. They're not supposed to be hurt, cry, and be comforted and held. No, they're supposed to, quote, man up and not be comforted. They're not supposed to admit that they're lonely or sad or need to be cuddled or hugged outside of a sexual context. Boys are allowed to be angry, however. They're allowed to be angry. They're allowed to be violent. Boys' sports are much more violent than girls. It's boys in the United States that play with guns, not girls. Girls are given dolls, boys are given guns. It's a very different set of qualities that are being elicited here. Boys want respect. They want other boys to look up to them. Now, the opposite of that is being bullied and victimized, where you don't have any comfort. Ramos, the killer, had nobody to stand up for him and comfort him when he stuttered and was bullied at school, even though a stutter itself is an advertisement of somebody desperately needing help. Boys are pushed to be manly, which means not to show vulnerability, but rather to show might and power. There's a book called The Man They Wanted Me to Be by Yates Sexton, and its subtitle is Toxic Masculinity and a Crisis of Our Own Making. And this is a crisis of our own making. These school shootings of boys who want respect. And respect is something one gets if one points a gun at another person and one is feared rather than fearing. There's a very good film called The Grand Canyon, and it's Danny Glover is the star. And in the beginning, a tow truck arrives because a white man's BMW is broken down and he's surrounded by a black gang. And one of the people has a gun. And he gets down and he talks, Danny Glover, the star who drives the tow truck, gets down off his truck and says, listen, you guys, I got to be able to tow this car away. You got to let this guy sit in his car and tow it away. And the man who's the head of the gang that surrounded this white guy whose BMW broke down says, okay, you talk to me with respect. You know how I get respect from the man whose car broke down? And he pulls out a gun. He said, that's how I get respect. And I think that Ramos, the killer of the 19 children and 2 teachers, felt he needed respect. He needed to stop being a victim and get respect. And he took it at the mouth of a gun. Another reason is that the NRA spends $250 million a year on lobbying senators and congressmen to stop any controls on guns and to pass laws that allow guns. Ted Cruz has an enormous amount of money from the gun lobby, as does Governor Abbott. So that's another thing. And they advertise guns as a way to help men be respected. There's an ad that just epitomizes it. It's an ad for a Bushmaster automatic weapon. And there's a little questionnaire under the picture of the Bushmaster. It says, does your wife or girlfriend make more money than you? Revoke your man card. Do you prefer tofu to meat? Revoke your man card. Do you say, I'm sorry? Revoke your man card. And there's several other things that are revocations that show vulnerability or need. Then at the end, it says, Bushmaster automatic weapon. Reinstate your man card. In other words, this will make you a man. This will make you dominant. This will make you respected. So that part of it is the psychological wish, finally, I will be feared and respected. Because I was always fearful of my mother's violent outbursts because she was on drugs, fearful of my mother's boyfriends who beat me up, fearful of the children at school who mocked me for my stammer, and no one helped. And now they'll show respect. Now I'll go to those children, and in the moment before they're killed, I'll get their respect. Very, very sad. If we look at gender, we see that some of the most violent people are male identified. If we look at January 6th, we see the Proud Boys, not the Proud Girls, the Proud Boys. We see the Boogaloo Boys. We see a majority of men and a small minority of women who are taking power by invading the Capitol building. We also look at the left in the United States, which is not united and empowering. Part of what we have to do is recommand the respect that all people need as workers together, rather than try to get people some respect at the mouth of a gun. Politically and economically, men have been disempowered and disrespected. Millions of jobs were outsourced overseas because capitalists wanted more money. They were sent to China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, where workers will work for between 99 cents, and the highest paid are Chinese workers who make $3.10 an hour for basic factory manufacturing work. American men and women created unions and fought hard to get living wages. They were the basis of the American middle class. And in the 50s, the height of the American middle class, men were paid a family wage, enough to support dependent wives and children, and had the prestige of being heads of family and those were mainly white men in our very racist and sexist society. But they had a position. They had a position in their communities because they worked at XY factory, and they had seniority, and they had decent pay. They don't have that anymore. And they don't have it even though the right wing would like us to believe that it's Black people or immigrants or women who took their jobs. No, it isn't. It's corporations who robotized, computerized, and outsourced their jobs for no other reason than to make more money, and then funded the Republican Party, which encouraged average people to feel that they had been disempowered by immigrants or women or people of color. And so men have lacked the kind of respect they used to have. The male gender has really suffered. Women feel better about ourselves than we used to. We work much harder than we ever used to, particularly white women who didn't used to have to work outside the home, unlike our Black sisters. But we also have independence. The majority of women in America are single and by choice. So men are being rejected as husbands and boyfriends. They don't have that status anymore. They're in trouble. That gender is in trouble. Also, males were taught that they are somehow entitled to be respected just because they're men, something that girls didn't ever have. And when they're not, it's an extra sting. And it's a sting they can address violently because they're not allowed to be needy and sad, but they are allowed to be angry and violent, to recapture their sense of manhood through a Bushmaster automatic or beating people up. The U.S., economically and politically, is also a culprit in all of this. And I will talk about that in our next episode, because mass murder is a huge problem in the United States. It's one of the few areas, in fact, it's the only area besides armaments manufacture where we are the world leader. You'll hear more about that next time. Thank you for listening. I hope that you listen. I hope you respond and send in your responses. I hope you ask your friends to respond, and I sincerely hope that you become a Patreon member and help this program and Democracy at Work to keep giving you these messages that no one else will give you.